If you've ever been the child your parents didn't believe in while they poured everything into your sibling, hit that like button. Subscribe if you believe that family who dismisses your ambitions eventually watches you succeed beyond what they thought possible, because what I'm about to tell you proves that sometimes the best revenge against people who called you unrealistic is building an empire so successful they have to ask you for jobs. My name is Nadia. I'm 35 years old, and I'm the CEO of a tech company worth $200 million. And the day my brother walked into my office asking for employment after his funded startup failed was the day I finally understood that being underestimated by your family isn't a limitation. It's fuel. But before I tell you about that job interview and the moment my parents realized which child they should have invested in, let me take you back to where sibling rivalry met parental favoritism and being called a dreamer became my greatest motivation, because every story of family vindication starts with someone deciding your worth before you've proven it. I grew up as the younger of 2 children in a family where my brother Grayson was the golden child and I was the afterthought. Grayson was 3 years older, naturally charismatic, good at sports, popular with peers and teachers. He had that effortless confidence that made people assume he'd be successful at whatever he tried. I was quieter, more introspective, preferring books to social activities. I wasn't unpopular, but I wasn't memorable either. In a family that valued extroversion and conventional achievement, I was often overlooked. My parents, Warren and Colette, were both successful professionals. Warren was an attorney. Colette was a real estate developer. They'd built comfortable wealth through traditional career paths, and they expected their children to follow similar trajectories. Stable professions, predictable success, conventional markers of achievement. From early childhood, the difference in how they treated us was obvious. Grayson's accomplishments were celebrated enthusiastically. Mine were acknowledged politely but without excitement. When he made the varsity basketball team, they threw a party. When I won a writing competition, they said that's nice and moved on. The pattern continued through high school and college. Grayson went to a prestigious university on his parents' dime. All expenses paid without question. When I applied to similar schools, my parents suggested I consider state university to save money. They'd pay for state school, but anything more expensive I'd need to fund through scholarships and loans. I pursued computer science at a state university, driven by a passion for problem-solving and building. I worked part-time throughout college to manage expenses my parents wouldn't cover. In contrast, my brother Grayson attended an expensive private school, with our parents funding his education and providing extra spending money. The favoritism became clearer after college when Grayson announced his mobile app idea, a simple service provider connector, essentially a hybrid of Yelp and TaskRabbit. Our parents were instantly supportive. That's exactly the kind of entrepreneurial thinking that builds wealth, they stated, agreeing to invest the entire $200,000 Grayson estimated for development and initial operating costs, taking a minority equity stake. Around the same time, I shared my own business idea. Having worked as a software engineer for 2 years, I had identified a clear market need for specialized project management software tailored to remote teams. My concept was well-researched and addressed gaps in existing tools. I asked my parents if they'd consider investing $50,000, substantially less than they'd given Grayson. Their response was completely different. "Nadia, you're being unrealistic," Colette said with concerned condescension. "Software development is extremely competitive. The market is saturated. You'd be competing against established companies with massive resources. Isn't it better to keep your stable job rather than chasing some dream?" "But Grayson's getting funding for his app," I protested. "Why is his idea viable but mine isn't?" "Because Grayson has business instincts," Warren said bluntly. "He's a natural entrepreneur. You're more of a dreamer, honey. There's nothing wrong with that, but we're not going to fund something that's likely to fail." The word dreamer was delivered as if it were a character flaw. Being practical and realistic was valued. Having ambitious ideas was dismissed as unrealistic fantasy. I left that conversation feeling dismissed and hurt. But more than hurt, I felt determined. If my parents wouldn't fund my idea, I'd find another way. Over the next 18 months, I worked my software engineering job while building my project management tool in every spare moment. Nights, weekends, vacation days, all of it went into development. I taught myself skills I didn't have, brought in a friend as co-founder who contributed design expertise, and slowly built a minimum viable product. During this time, Grayson launched his service marketplace app with great fanfare. My parents attended his launch party, invested in professional photography for his website, and told everyone they knew about his innovative business. Grayson's app got some initial users, but growth was slow. The market was indeed crowded, and his app didn't offer enough differentiation to gain significant traction. But my parents continued supporting him financially, providing additional funding when his initial capital ran out. Meanwhile, I launched my project management tool called Streamline with zero fanfare. Just a simple website beta testing with a few companies and word-of-mouth marketing. I couldn't afford the marketing campaigns Grayson was running. What I had was a genuinely useful product that solved real problems for remote teams. The early adoption was modest but steady. Companies that tried Streamline liked it and told other companies. I started getting organic growth through referrals. 6 months after launch, I quit my software engineering job to focus on Streamline full-time. My parents were horrified. "You're giving up a stable salary for this," Warren said, shaking his head. "This is exactly the kind of impractical decision we warned you about. What are you going to do when this fails?" "It's not going to fail," I said with more confidence than I felt. "I have paying customers. I have growth metrics. I have a product people actually want. Why can't you support this the way you supported Grayson?" "Because Grayson's venture is legitimate," Colette replied. "He has a proper business plan and investors. You're just tinkering with software." The dismissal stung, but I'd learned to expect it. My parents had decided years ago which child would succeed and which would struggle. Their expectations had become a self-fulfilling prophecy in their minds, even though reality was proving them wrong. Over the next 2 years, Streamline grew steadily. I reinvested every dollar of revenue into development and marketing. I hired developers as contractors, brought on a part-time salesperson, and built the company methodically without external funding. By year 2, Streamline had 500 paying customers and annual revenue of $2 million. We were profitable, growing, and building real market presence. Meanwhile, Grayson's service marketplace app was failing. After 3 years and approximately $400,000 of my parents' money plus additional funding they'd provided, the app had never achieved sustainable user growth. The competition was too intense. Grayson's execution wasn't strong enough. The app shut down quietly, a failure that cost my parents hundreds of thousands of dollars. They never acknowledged this failure publicly. Instead, they framed it as a learning experience, praising Grayson for his entrepreneurial attempt. He'd tried and learned valuable lessons, they said. He'd shown courage by pursuing his vision. The fact that he'd failed spectacularly with their money was never characterized as poor judgment or execution. It was just unfortunate market conditions. Grayson moved back home at age 30. His startup dream ended. No clear career direction. My parents supported him financially while he figured out next steps, paying for career coaching and networking memberships to help him find opportunities. Around this time, Streamline reached an inflection point. We'd been approached by a major venture capital firm interested in investing $10 million for a minority stake in the company. The valuation would put Streamline at $50 million, making my ownership stake worth approximately $30 million on paper. I accepted the investment, using the capital to accelerate growth and expand our team. We moved into real office space, hired a full-time executive team, and launched aggressive marketing campaigns. Within a year of the VC investment, Streamline had 3,000 customers and annual revenue of $15 million. We'd become a recognized player in the project management software space. Tech publications were writing about us. Industry analysts were including us in market reports. I was being invited to speak at conferences about building successful SaaS companies. My parents' reaction to this success was complicated. They were proud on some level but couldn't quite acknowledge it fully without confronting their previous dismissal of my ambitions. When they'd talk about my success to friends, they'd frame it as surprising rather than deserved. Nadia's little software thing has done better than we expected, Colette would say. We never thought it would grow like this. The implication being that my success was unexpected, rather than the result of competence and hard work they should have recognized. Meanwhile, Grayson was struggling. He'd taken a job in sales at a tech company but wasn't thriving. He'd been the golden child who was supposed to be successful effortlessly. When things didn't come easily, he became frustrated and disengaged. He cycled through several jobs, never staying longer than a year before deciding the role wasn't right for him. My parents continued supporting him financially through these transitions. They'd cover his rent when he was between jobs, pay for additional training or certifications, fund his networking and job search expenses. The support they gave him was what I could have used when starting Streamline. But they deemed him worthy of investment while calling me a dreamer. 3 years after the VC investment, Streamline had grown to 12,000 customers with annual revenue of $60 million. We'd expanded internationally, opened offices in 3 countries, and employed over 200 people. I was now genuinely wealthy with a net worth exceeding $50 million as the company's valuation climbed toward $200 million. The success was undeniable even to my parents. But rather than acknowledging they'd been wrong about me, they seemed uncomfortable with the inversion of expectations. Grayson was supposed to be a successful entrepreneur. I was supposed to be a stable employee with modest aspirations. The reality contradicting their assumptions created tension they didn't know how to process. 4 years after Streamline's launch, I was invited to give the keynote speech at a major tech conference. The topic was building successful companies without initial venture capital, something I'd done by bootstrapping Streamline to profitability before accepting outside investment. My parents attended the conference because I'd invited them specifically, wanting them to see what I'd built. The audience was over 2,000 people, all there to hear me speak about entrepreneurship and company building. I gave a presentation about my journey from idea to successful company. I talked about the importance of solving real problems, about building sustainable business models, about persisting through doubt and criticism. I didn't mention my parents directly, but I referenced being told my ambitions were unrealistic, that I was a dreamer rather than a practical thinker. The audience resonated with this message. Many entrepreneurs had faced similar dismissal from families who couldn't see their potential. After the speech, people approached with praise and business cards. Investors wanted meetings. Reporters wanted interviews. Job seekers wanted to work for Streamline. My parents stood to the side, watching this unfold with expressions I couldn't quite read. Afterward, Warren pulled me aside. "That was impressive, Nadia," he said stiffly. "You've built something real. We're proud of you." The words were right, but the tone was wrong. This wasn't enthusiasm or genuine pride. It was an uncomfortable acknowledgement of something that contradicted their fundamental assumptions about their children. I appreciated the effort from my parents, but I'd learned not to need their validation. I'd built Streamline believing in myself when they didn't, and their pride now, after undeniable success, felt less meaningful than support would have been when I truly needed it. 5 years after Streamline's launch, Grayson reached out. We met for coffee, and the confidence I remembered from his youth was diminished by years of career struggles. "Nadia, I need to be honest with you," he started. "I was the favorite. I got the support, the funding, the belief. You got dismissed and called unrealistic. But you're the one who actually built something successful." He apologized not for receiving the support, but for failing to recognize what I was building or advocating for me when our parents dismissed my ideas. When I asked what he wanted, he confessed, "I'm asking if you'd consider hiring me at Streamline." My first instinct was to refuse. But I saw the opportunity. Grayson working for my company would complete the reversal of our childhood dynamic. I agreed to consider it, with the strict condition that he would be an employee like any other, earning his position through performance, not family connection. After consulting my executive team, I offered him a mid-level project management position, a role demanding he prove his capability before advancing. He accepted, likely having few better options. Watching the former golden child work for the supposed dreamer was surreal. He performed well, achieving solid competence without the pressure of having to succeed effortlessly. He was exactly what the company needed in mid-level roles. 6 months after Grayson started, my parents requested a family dinner. The conversation quickly shifted to the elephant in the room. "Nadia, we owe you an apology," Warren said. "We were wrong about which of you had viable business instincts." "I appreciate you acknowledging that," I replied, but I immediately corrected their characterization. "You didn't invest in the wrong child's business. You invested in the child you believed in while refusing to support the child you didn't. That belief determined who got resources, not the quality of the business ideas." The table fell silent. I explained that if they had objectively evaluated our proposals, they might have recognized my project management tool had a clearer market need than yet another service marketplace app. Warren tried to defend their choice, citing Grayson's supposed business orientation. "So you're saying I wasn't business-oriented?" I pressed, noting my computer science background, market gap identification, product building, and eventual $200 million valuation. "At what point did I demonstrate business orientation if not through literally building a successful business?" Colette admitted. "We made judgments based on personality rather than potential. We thought Grayson's charisma would translate to business success, and your introversion would limit you. We were wrong about how those traits predict entrepreneurship." I told them I no longer needed their investment, but I needed acknowledgement that their favoritism harmed our relationship, and that their dismissal of my abilities was baseless. Grayson intervened, urging me to accept their attempt to make amends. "It's not about whether it's enough," I replied. "It's about making sure the record is clear. They were wrong. And the fact that I succeeded despite their lack of support rather than because of it is important." 7 years after Streamline's launch, the company was acquired for $350 million. My ownership stake made me genuinely wealthy. The extensive media coverage detailed my journey from bootstrap startup to a 9-figure exit, often mentioning I'd built the company without family financial support. The narrative of the determined founder who succeeded despite family doubt implicitly criticized my parents' judgment, forcing them to publicly confront their error. Following the acquisition, I used a portion of my wealth to establish the Dreamer Fund, a foundation supporting women in tech entrepreneurship who had been dismissed or underestimated. We funded over 50 companies in the first 2 years, validating my belief that dismissed founders often had viable ideas that simply needed support. The name itself reclaimed the term my parents had used dismissively. 8 years after launching Streamline, Grayson had earned several promotions within my company. He had proven himself capable and reliable, finding a level of success appropriate to his abilities within the organization I had built. He admitted the irony. "You did what I was supposed to do. The fact that it worked out backwards must be weird for our parents to process." "It's not backwards," I corrected. "It just didn't match their expectations." Our adult relationship had become healthier because we were both finally facing reality rather than performing for parental expectations. 9 years after Streamline's launch on my birthday, my parents finally delivered a complete acknowledgement. Warren spoke. "Nadia, we need to say something we should have said years ago. We were wrong about you in every way that mattered. We saw your introversion and thoughtfulness as limitations. We called you a dreamer when you were actually being strategic and insightful. Our judgment was completely flawed and our favoritism toward Grayson was unfair to both of you." Colette continued. "We invested hundreds of thousands in Grayson's failed venture while refusing to give you $50,000 that could have accelerated your success. That decision cost us financially, but more importantly, it damaged our relationship with you. We prioritized the wrong child's dreams, and we have to live with knowing we failed you when you needed support." The acknowledgement was complete and unqualified. No defensiveness, no justifications, just honest recognition of how badly they'd failed in their judgment and their parenting. I appreciated the honesty, though the wounds had scarred over years ago. "Thank you for saying that," I replied. "It doesn't change what happened, but it acknowledges reality. You made a choice based on assumptions that were wrong. You supported the child who fit your expectations rather than evaluating our ideas and abilities objectively. That's a lesson about bias and assumptions that hopefully others can learn from our family's story. Warren asked a question that had probably bothered him for years. If we'd invested in Streamline when you asked, would you have given us an equity stake? I considered this. Possibly. But by refusing, you gave me something more valuable than you realize. You forced me to build the company entirely on my own terms, without obligations to family investors who might have expected influence. Being told no made me more determined and more careful about building a sustainable business model. So in a way, your rejection helped create the conditions for my success. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. The refusal that was meant to protect me from unrealistic dreams had actually strengthened my resolve and forced me to build more carefully. Their lack of faith had been an inadvertent gift. 10 years after starting Streamline, I was firmly established as a successful entrepreneur and investor. My net worth exceeded $200 million. I served on boards of several companies. I was a respected voice in tech entrepreneurship, particularly around themes of persistence and building despite doubt. My parents had fully accepted the reality that I was the child whose judgment had been sound, whose ambitions had been realistic, whose dreams had been achievable. They'd made peace with being wrong, though I knew it still bothered them. Grayson had found his place as a solid contributor at companies I invested in or advised. He'd stopped trying to be the golden child who succeeded spectacularly and had become comfortable being someone who did good work at an appropriate level. The changed family dynamic was stable now. We'd all accepted reality rather than performing for expectations that had been wrong from the start. But the lesson from our story extended beyond just our family. I spoke frequently about how parental favoritism and dismissal could affect children's development and ambition. The story of being called a dreamer while my brother was funded became a teaching example about biases in how families evaluate potential. Dreamer Fund used my story in their messaging to women entrepreneurs. Being dismissed by family was a common experience for women building companies. Seeing someone who'd experienced that dismissal succeed anyway gave others permission to persist despite lack of family support. 11 years after being called a dreamer, I'd built not just a successful company but an entire ecosystem supporting other dismissed dreamers. The term meant to diminish me had become a badge of honor, a signal that ambitious thinking despite criticism could lead to extraordinary outcomes. My parents' house now featured photos of both children, a shift that reflected their integration of my success into the family narrative after years of undeniable evidence overcoming their initial assumptions. Friends often asked them about my companies and my wealth, and Warren and Colette had learned to discuss my achievements without the qualifying surprise that once colored their descriptions. They had achieved a level of acknowledgement where they could admit they'd been wrong and I'd been right, without needing defensive justification. 12 years after starting Streamline, I published a book detailing my journey from family dismissal through bootstrapping to a successful exit. The book became a bestseller in the entrepreneurship category, resonating with readers for its honest discussion of family dynamics and how being underestimated could be motivational fuel. I gave my parents advance copies. After reading it, Colette called me, tearfully acknowledging the hurt their dismissal had caused. "We thought we were being practical and protective," she confessed. "We didn't realize we were being unsupportive and biased." I explained that they had acted based on assumptions about who we were, rather than observing who we were becoming. A common parental mistake, but one with significant consequences in our case. 13 years after my business pitch was rejected, Warren did something unexpected. He wrote an article for a business publication about parental and investor mistakes. The piece candidly detailed his decision to fund Grayson's failed venture while refusing to invest in mine. He explicitly acknowledged it as one of the worst judgment calls of his life, when he called me a dreamer and denied my funding request. The article went viral, shared by thousands of parents and entrepreneurs, and even became a teaching example in business schools regarding cognitive biases in funding decisions. Warren's willingness to publicly recognize his error was immensely meaningful. It was a public recognition that his judgment had been flawed and dismissing me had been costly, both financially and relationally. 14 years after starting Streamline, the company I built was part of a major tech conglomerate, its product used by over 50,000 companies worldwide, affecting how millions collaborated remotely. The software once dismissed as tinkering was now industry standard. That impact was far more satisfying than the financial success. Meanwhile, Grayson had risen to senior management at one of the companies supported by my Dreamer Fund. The golden child who was expected to succeed independently was now succeeding within the ecosystem the dismissed dreamer had built, a complete and permanent reversal of family expectations. 15 years after being called a dreamer, I spoke at a major conference, sharing my family story with my parents' and brother's permission. I told the audience that the reversal of family expectations was not about revenge, but about persistence despite doubt. I encouraged those who had been dismissed by family to choose fuel, proving their capability not to hurt their doubters but to demonstrate their own worth. My parents sat in the audience, allowing themselves to be the cautionary tale, their final acknowledgement of how wrong they had been. This public storytelling offered tangible hope to others, as a young woman tearfully approached me after the speech, saying her parents had just refused to invest in her company. I was able to offer her my story as proof that she could succeed anyway. 16 years after starting Streamline, I gave the commencement speech at my state university alma mater. My message was directed at students without wealthy families or parental funding, contrasting my path with Grayson's private school experience. I emphasized that belief in yourself is often more valuable than family funding, and determination matters more than initial advantage. My parents attended and heard me publicly state that being the unfunded, dismissed child had ultimately been advantageous. Warren later approached me, acknowledging that while I'd turned their mistake into my origin story, he and my mother would regret their judgment forever. I corrected him, stating that their error went beyond just a bad business call. It was a failure of perception and judgment. They had let bias prevent them from seeing reality and recognizing our true capabilities. 17 years later, the Dreamer Fund had funded over 200 underestimated women-founded companies. The fund's strong success rate proved that investing in dismissed dreamers was not only morally right but financially sound. My work with the fund, helping others avoid the dismissal I'd experienced and providing the belief my parents had withheld, became the ultimate validation. Every woman who succeeded through our support confirmed that the widespread dismissal we faced was a matter of bias, not a lack of capability. 18 years after my parents refused to invest in my idea, Grayson made a perceptive observation. "You realize you've built your entire career narrative around being the dismissed child," he said. "The dreamer who proved the doubters wrong. That's powerful branding, but do you think you'll ever move past it?" I assured him I wasn't embracing victimhood. I was leveraging my experience to help others facing similar dismissal. My success isn't defined by proving our parents wrong. It's defined by building companies that matter and supporting founders who need belief. Grayson conceded the point, adding that he was glad things unfolded as they did. "If our parents had funded you instead of me, you might have succeeded earlier, but I wouldn't have learned the lessons that failure taught me." He had learned that being the favorite didn't guarantee success, while I had learned that being dismissed didn't prevent it. 19 years after starting Streamline, I received a Lifetime Achievement Award for entrepreneurship and supporting women in business. The ceremony featured video tributes, including one from my parents, Warren and Colette. Their public acknowledgement was the most complex and complete part of the night. They spoke openly about their mistakes and judgment, admitting they were wrong about my potential and proud of what I had built despite their lack of support. "Our daughter succeeded not because of us but in spite of us," Warren stated on camera. "We dismissed her abilities and refused the support we freely gave her brother. That mistake has taught us painful lessons about bias, favoritism, and how wrong parental assumptions can be." The family story transformed from private shame into a public, discussed teaching example. 20 years after being labeled a dreamer, I reflected on the journey. The path had been longer and harder without family funding, but every achievement was undeniably mine. Proving my capability without the advantage of family belief was far more satisfying than inheriting confidence would have been. My relationship with my parents is now cordial, though the damage done during those crucial years created a permanent distance. However, Grayson and I developed a genuine adult friendship built on mutual respect. He found his level of success and contentment, while I exceeded any reasonable definition of it. Today, at 35, I am wealthy, run investment funds, serve on corporate boards, and influence an entire industry's approach to supporting underestimated founders. The child dismissed as unrealistic became the person defining what's possible. My parents funded my brother's failed startup while refusing to invest in my successful one. That decision cost them financially and damaged our relationship, but it created the narrative that made my success meaningful to others facing similar dismissal. They chose to invest in charisma over capability, and in the child who matched their expectations rather than the one who challenged them. The golden child they funded now works at companies the dismissed dreamer built. That reversal represents complete vindication, demonstrating capability they failed to recognize. My parents live with the knowledge they backed the wrong child and damaged a relationship by prioritizing bias over honest evaluation. They became cautionary examples, teaching painful lessons about how bias prevents clear perception. Grayson learned that being the golden child creates a crushing pressure, and that finding his actual level was healthier than performing for others' expectations. I learned that dismissal can be powerful fuel. My success, earned without family support, is deeply satisfying because it's truly mine, and supporting other underestimated founders is the best use of that success. If you are the person no one believes in, remember that their judgment doesn't determine your potential. Build anyway. The person no one invests in often becomes the person everyone else needs.
Thank you for watching. If you enjoy watching Karma, Payback, come full circle every week, we dive into tales of betrayal and poetic justice. Don't miss the next one. Tap the subscribe button and join the Revenge Squad.